Nobody told you that the moment your life changes forever would look like a Tuesday, ordinary and forgettable, smelling of dust and manure and the particular kind of hopelessness that settles over a place where living things are reduced to numbers and walking away is easier than caring. But that is exactly how it happened, on a morning so unremarkable that you almost didn't go, almost stayed home, almost let the day pass like every other day before it, and you would have spent the rest of your life never knowing what you missed. Never knowing what was waiting for you in that forgotten corner of a forgotten town where the auction yard sat between a broken fence and a sky so pale it looked like the color had been washed out of it by too many years of indifference. You had been traveling for weeks by then, moving from place to place the way people do when they are not running toward anything in particular but are not quite ready to stop either, carrying everything you owned in a pack that had seen better days, your boots worn thin at the soles, your coat patched at the elbows, your money down to the last few coins that clinked together with a sound that felt more like a reminder than a comfort. You were not in a bad way, not exactly, but you were not in a good way either. You were somewhere in between, in that gray space where life feels suspended, where the future is a fog and the past is something you have mostly stopped looking at because looking back never changed anything for you before and you had no reason to believe it would now. The town was called something you would later forget, one of those names that seems to exist only on old maps and in the memories of people who never left. A cluster of buildings that hugged each other like they were afraid of the emptiness surrounding them. Streets that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. People who nodded at strangers but didn't smile. Not out of cruelty but out of a kind of exhaustion that comes from living in a place the world has mostly passed by. You stopped there because your legs needed rest and your stomach needed filling. And you had heard at the last crossroads that there was an inn willing to trade a meal for an hour's work, and that was enough reason to detour. You didn't plan to go to the auction. You heard it before you saw it, the low murmur of voices gathering at the edge of town near the pens, the occasional shuffle and stamp of animals being moved, the sharp calls of men doing business with the economy of people who have done this 1,000 times before. You went because there was nothing else to do while you waited for the innkeeper to finish preparing what he owed you, and because something about a crowd, any crowd, felt like warmth against the particular cold of being alone on the road for too long. The yard was smaller than you expected. A rough square of packed earth surrounded by a low wooden fence, the kind of fence that existed more as a suggestion than a barrier, posts leaning at angles that had long since stopped being intentional, rails warped by seasons of weather that cared nothing for maintenance. There were maybe 30 people gathered, farmers mostly, their hands the color and texture of the land they worked, their eyes quick and evaluating, moving over the animals with the practiced assessment of people who understand value in practical terms. A few traders stood at the edges with the casual ease of men who are never truly off the clock. Children ran between the legs of adults until they were caught and stilled by a hand on the shoulder or a word spoken quietly but firmly. The morning moved through its ordinary business. A pair of oxen that drew real attention, men leaning in, binning with the seriousness of a significant investment. Some goats that sold quickly and without drama. A mule that nobody wanted at first but eventually went to a farmer in a battered hat who seemed to feel he had gotten a bargain based on the way he walked away. You watched without particular interest, eating the heel of bread you had saved from the night before, content to be still for a while and let the world move around you. And then they brought it forward. You noticed the horse before you fully understood why it was making something shift in your chest, that low, quiet displacement of feeling that happens before the mind catches up with the heart. It was led in by a boy who looked embarrassed to be doing the job, holding the rope at arm's length as if he wanted distance between himself and whatever conclusion people were going to draw. The horse walked slowly, not with the careful slowness of a proud animal choosing its pace, but with the heavy slowness of something that has forgotten what it felt like to move with purpose. Its coat was dull, the kind of dullness that doesn't come from a bad season but from a long accumulation of them, layer upon layer of hardship laid down like sentiment over what might once have been something beautiful. The ribs were visible. Not dramatically, not the way they are in pictures meant to shock, but visible enough, a quiet testimony to too little food over too much time. The head was low, not resting, not relaxed, just low, as if the animal had made a calculation about the energy required to hold it up and found the balance not in its favor. The crowd reacted the way crowds do when something makes them uncomfortable, which is to say they retreated into the performance of not caring. People shook their heads with the slow certainty of those who have already made up their minds. Someone to your left made a sound that was half laugh and half dismissal, the sound people make when they want to signal sophistication, the ability to see things as they are without sentiment clouding the view. You heard the words "not worth the feed" spoken clearly enough that they were meant to be heard, a consensus being established, a social permission being granted to everyone present to look away and feel justified doing it. The auctioneer, a compact man with a voice trained to project over noise and indifference, ran through his introduction with the shortened version he reserved for animals nobody wanted, the words moving fast and practiced like a formality being discharged rather than a sale being made. He named a starting price that was already low, the kind of number that signals an expectation rather than a hope. Nobody bid. The silence had a texture to it. Not the silence of suspense, not the silence of deliberation, but the silence of conclusion, of a verdict already rendered, of a thing already decided before it began. The auctioneer looked out over the crowd with eyes that had seen this before and would see it again, and he lowered the price, not because he expected it to change anything but because procedure required it. Still nobody bid. And that was when you looked at the horse again, really looked, not at the coat or the ribs or the lowered head, but at something harder to name, something in the quality of the stillness. Because the horse was not reacting. Not to the crowd that was dismissing it, not to the noise and smell and press of people, not to the boy's nervous grip on the rope or the auctioneer's voice cycling through its futile repetitions. It was simply standing, waiting, with the quality of patience that felt less like resignation and more like something that had made a decision to endure whatever was required without the additional cost of distress. There was a difference, you realized slowly, between an animal that had given up and an animal that was conserving itself for something it had not yet been given reason to spend itself on. You could not have explained how you knew that. You just knew it the way you sometimes know things that arrive not through the mind but through some older, quieter channel. Your hand went up almost before you authorized it. Your voice, when it came, was steady and clear, cutting across the settled silence of a decision already made, and it said the number that was on the board, the lowest number, the last number, and it fell into that quiet like a stone into still water. Every head turned. The auctioneer blinked, recalibrated, and in the voice of a man who had learned not to question the strange decisions of buyers, called the bid and waited the required interval and then brought the whole brief, anticlimactic thing to a close with the strike of his gavel. Yours. Just like that. With the last real money you had left. The laughter came next. Not cruel laughter, not exactly, but the laughter of people who have just watched someone do something they themselves would never do. The laughter that is partly disbelief and partly relief that it was not them making the choice. You heard the words wasted and fool and dying animal and a few others you chose not to process, and you walked forward and took the rope from the grateful boy and led the horse out of the yard without hurrying in, without looking back, because looking back at people who have already decided what they think of you is a habit worth breaking early. The horse walked beside you without resistance. That was the first thing you noticed. Not docility, not defeat, but a kind of considered cooperation, as if it was capable of judgment and had made one. You didn't understand it then. You told yourself you were reading things into an animal that had simply run out of energy for protest, and that was probably the smarter interpretation, and you held onto it through the rest of the morning and into the long, warm afternoon as you made your way out of town along a road that turned from mud to gravel to dry red earth as the buildings fell away behind you. You stopped when the light began to change. There was a place off the road where the ground leveled out under a group of old trees, the kind of trees that have been there long enough to feel permanent, their roots spreading out from their bases like the legs of something resting, their canopy dense enough to hold the warmth of the day a little after the air around them had begun to cool. You found a flat stone and sat on it and set about making a fire with the same unhurried competence you had developed over weeks of nights like this one, feeding it small pieces first, coaxing the flame from spark to steadiness, watching the orange light push the shadows back to a respectful distance. The horse stood at the edge of the firelight. You had looped the rope loosely around the low branch, more as a formality than a real restraint, because you had a feeling it was not going anywhere, and it didn't. It stood with its head slightly raised now. You noticed that, a small change, barely worth measuring, but there, and it was looking out at the dark beyond the trees with the particular kind of attention that animals give to things they can sense but you cannot yet. You ate what you had, which was not much, and you thought about tomorrow with the practical, undramatic acceptance that comes from experience, from having had many tomorrows that looked uncertain from the night before and turned out to be survivable. You thought about the horse and what feeding it would require and where you might find work that would cover both of you, and the math was uncomfortable but not impossible, and you decided to let it rest for now and give the problem to the morning version of yourself, who would presumably be better rested and more resourceful. The fire was comfortable. The night sounds of the land moved around you, the insects conducting their endless, layered conversation, the occasional distant movement of something larger passing through the dark on its own business, the soft shift of line through the treetops, and underneath it all the deep, patient silence of a landscape that has been here through everything and will be here through everything still to come. You were on the edge of sleep, that warm borderland where thought loosens its grip and images begin to move with their own logic, when the horse moved. You heard it before you felt it. The sharp change in the quality of its breathing, the shift from the slow rhythm of an animal at rest to something quicker, more engaged. Then the hooves, not the random shuffle of repositioning but deliberate, directional, moving toward you with an urgency that snapped you awake with the full immediacy of something that demands your entire attention at once. You sat up. The horse was coming toward you fast, not running but moving with the kind of focused intention that makes running unnecessary, its head up now, its ears sharp and forward, its eyes catching the firelight in a way that made them look like they were lit from within. It reached you and did not stop, did not slow, pressed itself against you with a weight and insistence that pushed you to your feet and continued pushing, moving you backward the way water moves small things, not violently but without any possibility of argument. You stumbled back 3 steps, 4, confused and disoriented, your mind scrambling to understand what was happening, whether the animal was panicking, whether something in the dark had frightened it, whether you needed to comment or let go of everything and run. You were about to speak, to try the voice that sometimes works on frightened animals, the low, steady one, when the ground you had been sitting on gave way. Not with an explosion. Not with warning. Simply gave way, as if it had been considering the matter for some time and had finally reached a decision. The flat stone where you had been resting, the earth beneath and around it, the whole comfortable configuration of solid ground that had seemed as permanent as anything you had ever sat on, opened downward with a sound like something old exhaling for the last time, and dropped into a dark that received it. Without echo, without end, without any indication of a bottom that was anywhere near the surface. You stood at the edge of what remained, the horse pressed against your side, both of you still, and you looked down into the dark where you had been, and the dark looked back at nothing, because there was nothing to look back at, because you were not there, because you were here, standing, breathing, your heart making itself known to you with a force and clarity it rarely achieves outside of moments like this one. You stood there for a long time. Long enough for the fire to drop to embers and the cold to begin finding its way through your coat. Long enough for your hands to stop shaking and then start again and then finally settle. Long enough to begin to understand what had just happened and, more importantly, what had just not happened. At some point you turned and looked at the horse. It was standing calmly now, the urgency gone from its body, its breathing returned to the slow, even rhythm of an animal at rest. It was looking at you with the same attentive, considering quality you had noticed in the yard, that same quality of intelligent observation that you had talked yourself out of attributing to anything real. It did not seem afraid. It did not seem agitated. It seemed, if you had to find a word for it, satisfied. Not in a theatrical way, not in a way that announced itself. Simply settled, in the way of something that has completed a task and understood and did the thing it came prepared to do. You reached out slowly and put your hand on its neck. The coat was rough under your palm, still carrying the evidence of its long, hard season, but beneath it the muscle was warm and alive and present, and the horse leaned into your hand almost imperceptibly, a small offering, a small acknowledgement, and you stood there in the dying firelight at the edge of a dark drop that should have been the end of you, and you felt something shift in your chest that had nothing to do with fear. The night moved on. You rebuilt the fire carefully, moving away from the collapsed section of ground, finding a new place that you checked with your heel before you trusted it, and you sat down and looked at the fire and thought about the people in the yard, the ones who had shaken their heads and named the horse useless and laughed at you when you took the reins. You thought about the word useless and what it actually means, and you thought about the particular arrogance of deciding what something is worth in 30 seconds in a dusty yard on an ordinary morning when all you are measuring is surface, all you are reading is the legible shorthand of condition, when the actual content of a thing, the real nature of it, the capacity that has nothing to do with how it looks in a given moment, goes entirely unread because nobody stopped long enough to look for it. And you thought about yourself, if you were being honest, because the habit of that particular dismissal, the glance in the conclusion, the 30-second verdict, was not something you were entirely free of either, and you knew it, and sitting there in the dark beside a horse that had just given you back your life with no fanfare and no demand for recognition, it seemed like a good time to be honest about the things you did that you told yourself you didn't. If you're still here, still listening, still feeling this story move through you the way it moved through me the first time I heard it, then you already understand why this family matters. Not because we tell stories, but because we tell the ones that ask something of you, the ones that find something in you and turn it over gently and let you look at it in the firelight. If that means something to you, stay. Like this. Share it with someone who needs it tonight. Subscribe, because there are more stories coming and every single one of them is waiting for you. You are already part of this. You have been since the beginning. The days that followed were different. Not in the grand, narrative sense of everything changing at once, but in the quieter, more durable sense of a shift in perception that alters the way ordinary things appear. You walked differently. You were not sure how to explain it except that you felt less alone in a way that had nothing to do with company and everything to do with having been seen by something that had no reason to see you, having been chosen by something you had barely chosen in return, having been saved by the very thing the world had decided was not worth saving. The horse recovered. It took time, as real things do, not the accelerated recovery of stories that need to move quickly, but the gradual, stubborn reclamation of health that happens meal by meal and day by day, so slowly at first that you could not see it happening but could only notice, looking back across a week or two, that something had changed. The ribs became less visible. The coat began to find its luster, slowly, the way a fire finds its warmth, from the inside out. The head came up higher. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because the simple, adequate provision of enough food and enough rest and enough miles of quiet road beside someone who was not going to give up on it turned out, in the end, to be sufficient. You found work in the towns you passed through, the kind of work that was always available to someone willing to do what needed doing without requiring persuasion, hauling and fixing and loading in the small, invisible labors that hold communities together without ever appearing in any account of their history. You were good at finding it. You had always been good at finding it. And now you had a reason beyond yourself to find it, which is a different kind of motivation, cleaner and stronger, the kind that does not run out when you are tired or discouraged because it is not about you. The horse, for its part, was extraordinary. You understood this more fully as the weeks passed and you had more opportunity to observe it, to watch the way it moved through the world with an attention that exceeded what you had come to expect from animals, from people, from yourself on most days. It noticed things. Subtle things, the slight wrongness in the surface of a road that looked solid but wasn't, the particular quality of air that arrived before weather that was going to matter, the hesitation in a stranger's approach that signaled something requiring caution before any visible sign confirmed it. You learned to pay attention to what it was paying attention to. This is perhaps the most important lesson the whole experience taught you, not the dramatic one about the collapsed ground and the life it saved, though that one was important too, but this quieter one, that the value of a companion, animal or otherwise, is sometimes most evident in what they perceive that you would have missed alone. That the act of genuine attention to another living thing, real attention, the kind that does not have an agenda or a conclusion waiting at the end of it, opens you to information you would otherwise pass right by. There was a moment, some weeks after the night by the fire, when you were riding through a stretch of country that was new to you, hills that rolled in long soft curves on either side of the road, the grass on them a green so specific to the season that it existed only in this window of weeks and would not come back exactly like this until the following year. The sky was the kind of blue that sits above certain kinds of weather, a deep, still blue that looks like it goes on forever and probably does. The road was empty ahead of you and empty behind, and the world felt, in that particular hour, like something that had been arranged specifically for the experience of being in it, which is a feeling that comes rarely and goes quickly and is worth noting when it arrives. The horse was walking with a rhythm that matched your own breathing, that easy synchronization that develops between a person and an animal when they have spent enough time together that the boundary between them becomes something permeable, something passed through and back again without ceremony. You were not thinking about anything in particular. You were just there, in the motion, in the light, in the green and blue and the quiet. And then, without quite knowing when it happened, you realized you were happy. Not the loud, announced happiness of an occasion, not the happiness that requires a cause and can be pointed at, but the deep, undefended happiness of someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be, doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing, in the company of exactly who they are supposed to be with, and who knows it, and is not afraid of it, and does not feel the need to hold it at arm's length in case it turns out to not be real. It was real. You thought again about the auction yard. About the boy with the rope and the auctioneer with his shortened version of the introduction and the crowd with their quick, efficient dismissals. You thought about the laughter that followed you out of the yard and how it had sounded then, teeny and certain, and how it sounded now, from this distance, from this altitude of understanding, which was that it had been the laughter of people looking at the surface of a thing and believing they had seen the whole of it. The horse shook its mane in a way that may have been coincidence and may not have been. You put a hand briefly on its neck, warm and present and alive, and the hills rolled away around you in both directions, and the road went on ahead into a distance you were no longer in a hurry to reach, because the going was its own reward, the traveling was its own arrival, and you had in your company something that had already proven, without drama and without demand, that the things this world dismisses too quickly are sometimes the things that save it. There are people in this story you will recognize. Not the farmers with their quick eyes or the auctioneer with his efficient voice, though you may recognize them too, but the horse. You will recognize the horse because you have been the horse, or you have been close enough to something that felt like being the horse to understand what it is to stand in a place where no one is bidding for you, where the murmur of dismissal is so consistent and so loud that it begins to sound like fact rather than opinion, where the temptation is to believe what the crowd has decided because the crowd is so sure and you are so tired. You will recognize the stillness that is not surrender. You will recognize the waiting that is not defeat. You will recognize the slow, patient conservation of something real and true and capable, preserved intact through seasons of hardship for the moment when it would matter, when it would be needed, when it would be the exact thing standing between someone and a dark that has no bottom. And there are people in this story who will recognize themselves in you. In the raised hand that went up almost without permission. In the bid that caught through a settled silence. In the choice to take the rope from the embarrassed boy and walk out of the yard without looking back at people who had already made their decision and were never going to unmake it no matter what happened after. in the decision to carry a thing the world had written off and discover in the carrying of it something that the world, for all its quick eyes and efficient assessments and certainty about what is and isn't worth the feed, had entirely failed to see. The road goes on. It always goes on. There will be other towns and other days and other moments when the ground shifts beneath you in ways both literal and otherwise, when the thing you thought was solid turns out to have been borrowing stability from somewhere it no longer has access to, when the drop opens beneath the ordinary surface of a Tuesday and everything you were standing on simply isn't there anymore. Those moments come for everyone. The question is never whether they come. The question is who is walking beside you when they do. Choose carefully what you dismiss. Choose carefully what you walk past in the dusty yards of your life where living things are judged in seconds and moved along quickly to make room for the next assessment. The thing the crowd is shaking its head at, the thing the practiced eyes have already moved on from, the thing standing quietly at the end of its rope without fighting and without breaking, that thing has not told you everything it is yet. It has not had the occasion. It has not been given the fire and the dark in the moment of real need that reveals what a thing is actually made of beneath the surface the world has learned to read and dismiss so efficiently. Give it the occasion. Give it the fire. Give it the night in the open road in the simple sufficiency of being seen without the condition of being already impressive. You may find, as the weeks pass and the coat begins to find its luster again from the inside out, that what you carried home from the yard on the last of your coins was not the broken thing the crowd assured you it was, but something waiting, something held in reserve, something that knew things about the ground you were walking on that you could not yet know, and that would, when the moment arrived and the earth gave way in the dark open beneath the ordinary surface of a Tuesday, move toward you with the full, unhesitating weight of everything it had been saving. Some things wait their whole lives for the one person willing to place the only bid. And when you find each other, in the dust and laughter of some forgotten yard, in the unremarkable middle of a morning you almost didn't go to, you will understand that the story was always heading here, to this moment, to this recognition, to the hand on the warm neck in the road. I had in the deep, undefended knowledge that whatever comes next, you are not walking into it alone. That is the thing nobody in the auction yard was measuring. That is the thing that never fits in the 30-second assessment, that never shows in the legible shorthand of condition, that cannot be read from the outside of a thing by people who have decided the outside is all there is. The loyalty that chooses you before you have earned it. The knowing that sees the drop in the ground before the ground has shown it. The presence that circles you in the dark and presses you back from the edge of something irreversible and then stands calm at your side in the firelight, asking for nothing, offering everything, already having given the only thing that, in the end, ever actually matters. You didn't go to that auction expecting anything. You went because your legs were tired and your time needed filling and the sound of a crowd felt like warmth. You left with something the crowd had looked at and found wanting and turned away from. Something they would not have given another thought to by the time the morning's real business was concluded. And that something saved your life. Not because of magic, not because of story, but because it was paying attention when you were not, because it had been paying attention all along, reading the ground beneath the ordinary surface of things, watching and waiting and conserving itself for the moment when its particular knowledge, the knowledge the crowd did not know it had and would not have valued if they had, would be the only thing standing between you and a dark with no bottom. Be willing to place the bid on the thing nobody wants. Be willing to walk out of the yard with the rope in your hand and the laughter at your back and the road ahead and the last of your coins spent on something the world has already dismissed. Be willing to discover, in the long miles, in the quiet nights, in the fire, in the dark, what you actually brought home from that dusty place and what it has been waiting, patiently and without complaint, through every hard season, to give you. Some things were always going to save you. You just had to be the one willing to show up for them first.